Namaskar, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so happy that you have joined this online course, The African Reality and Tools to Change the World. It began on August 11th. It's continuing until October 8th. There are a total of 28 90-minute classes by 25 esteemed lecturers. The classes are being recorded and are being posted on YouTube. This course has been organized by Amandla African Samaj and the Prout Research Institute. You can listen to this class in English, French, Portuguese, or Spanish due to our very hardworking interpreter volunteers. By clicking on the globe icon and choosing your language. 144 people have registered from 12 countries of Africa and 21 other countries. Today is class number 12, entitled Spiritual Development in the Context of Physical and Social Reality. Our speaker today is Dr. Richard Maxwell. Richard Maxwell retired from a long-term private practice as a licensed clinical neuropsychologist. He retired in 2015. He has been actively involved in the Ananda Marga Yoga organization in various capacities since 1974 and is currently engaged in formal meditation research. A study done together with Sucharit Katyal, titled Characteristics of Kundalini-Related Sensory, Motor, and Affective Experiences During Tantric Yoga Meditation. This was published in a peer-reviewed journal called Frontiers in Psychology, a follow-up study emphasizing spirituality and devotion within Tantric Yoga, Ananda Marga meditation. He is preparing now. So, Raghuveer, Dr. Richard Maxwell, please begin.
Namaskar. So I'll start by sharing my screen. I've got to see this.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
So, spiritual development in the context of physical and social reality. By accomplishing spiritual development is, from the perspective of some, the purpose of meditation. Now, in current research on meditation, there has been a very extensive effort to secularize or remove all spiritual elements and just break it down into various cognitive or structures, the way we think, and modifying the way we think. But there's been some recent pushback on this, meaning that there are some beginning signs in the research literature showing that actually, if you include what are called spiritual elements in meditation, you see additional gains. You see further advantages to the individuals that are engaged in those practices. So a fundamental question then becomes, what does spiritual mean? And there is a lot of debate about that, but often spiritual is used to reference something that is beyond the physical and social realms, and has something that is not related to the material world, which is what science is so focused on. But this pushback is coming in the context of the reality of what our being is more than physical and more than social. And so we will explore some of these ideas as we go through this process. And the way I want to structure this, or way I will be structuring this, is in 3 sections, dealing with different realms of concepts. And before I get into some explanations, I'm going to be asking people to interpret the questions or realms of function that I'm about to talk about. And when I do discuss, I will be basing a lot of what I say on a series of quotes by the spiritual master of Ananda Marga, which for me personally has provided a lot of guidance, and hopefully I'll be able to help make sense of it for you, not just in realms of spiritual literature, but in terms of how does that relate to somebody who's more scientifically oriented even. Although we will move some beyond typical science. So this spiritual master of Ananda Marga, I should say, is referred variously as Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar or Sri Sri Anandamurti, depending on the framework in which you're orienting. But I have a feeling that you've probably heard some reference to him previously. So let me move on. Why should meditation be so hard? There are so many different styles, so many different forms of meditation, and all these, there's a lot of research going into meditation now because there are very clear benefits, at least at a minimum, for reducing stress. Why should there be a problem in just learning some technique? What is so hard? And so I'd like people as to throw out what they would see is why it's difficult in the chat. Just if you can write various things that you think might be hard about being able to do meditation. So I'm seeing some here, distractions, desires, worries, mind wanders, hard to concentrate. These are all very true. Mind does get preoccupied. Sometimes all the emotional stuff, whoops, let me see. I'm feeling due to all that I've been going through at work and being accepted by Margie's disturbs my equanimity and makes my mind too unsettled to meditate. There can be emotional stuff coming from any and every human interaction. Yes, life is complicated. Ah, the goal is not so clear. Yes, I like that. And could I have a translation of the next one?
Guruvati?
Yes, just 1 second.
That's the
Not
translation. It's
so
not
easy.
easy if you haven't started asanas.
Okay, well, there may well be other practices that facilitate the performance of meditation, certainly. No. There's one in French, it seems.
Just a moment. So the translation is when you learn at later ages, it appears difficult because the subconscious mind is already loaded.
Ah, interesting.
And another one is meditation becomes difficult to practice if it's not done regularly.
That's meaningful too, yes.
Catherine said neurochemistry is challenging to balance under stress conditions.
That's an interesting angle. It's a more physical interpretation of psychological reality. But yes, that's very true.
Radhana says if you're falling asleep instead of meditating. Padma Shiva said, when you learn it at an early age, it seems difficult because of the overloaded subconscious. Yes, we said that.
And there's another French one. Il faut aussi équilibrer le corps physique et mental. I can.
Yeah,
I
we
know a
got
little.
that.
Oh, did we?
If it's not done regularly,
Ah, okay.
it's difficult.
Okay, well, those are some wonderful ideas. Did we get an?
It's also important to balance the physical and mental body.
Okay. Yes, balance is essential. Sure. Well, I have a series of things, and it includes these and maybe another number of things from various realms. So first, Anandamurti is saying something about japa here. You know you are to do japa of your mantra always, repetition. So there's a certain sound that is used as a focus for meditation. And you're to repeat it. While doing meditation, you do it. While doing worldly duties, while attending to mundane duties, you also should remember your mantra mentally. Generally, you forget it. You are so much disturbed and so much engaged in the work that work takes the prominent role and your own incantation becomes less important. So that's repeating a number of the ideas that were voiced. A unit mind, meaning what we know as our personal mind, can only think of one object at a particular time. So our mind is naturally going to be jumping around a lot to keep track of all the details of our lives. And so this is the habitual way that the mind operates. It's difficult to stick to just one object. One characteristic of the mind is that it moves. It cannot remain stationary. It must move. Even when quiet, it goes on moving. Movement is a must. In order to maintain its existence, the mind must maintain its dynamicity, its vitality, its vibrance. And this movement is called vritti. Now, vritti is, well, let me finish. In English, you may say propensity, but propensity is not the proper term. Vritti, this psychic urge or psychic mobility. What keeps the mind moving is what are called these vrittis, that the mind is a function of the activity of all of these psychic urges. Now, this is a very complex topic, which we really won't be going into except just these little asides, because it links with chakras, it links with many levels of physiology and glandular secretions. It is a very complex topic that we don't have time to deal with, but just to understand that there are certain driving forces that are operative in your mind that keep it moving. Another step more complicated. All the protozoic minds in the human try to influence the human mind. Protozoic minds are cellular minds. Every single cell in the body is said to have its own mind. And all these minds have their own voices, I guess you could say, their ways of communicating. On top of that, there are metazoic minds that try to do likewise. Metazoic minds are minds coordinated functioning of the cells of organs. And so This is a more complex and higher level mind that is also attempting to influence the unit mind or human mind, is the personal mind, where the personal mind of a human is not vigilant. It becomes influenced by the protozoic and the metazoic minds. So this is actually vastly complicated to think about the complexity of your physical body and add a whole mental layer to it. And to think that all of this is influencing how you think or why you think any particular thing. Plus, people's minds are generally influenced by the environment they live in. When you see your neighbor taking tea and the scent of the tea wafts through the air to your nose, you also feel like taking tea. This is the influence of the environment. Again, when something is repeatedly told to you, that does have an impact on your mind. That will be an instance of an imposed sanskara. Sanskara is a very complex term also. It relates to the reactions that get stored in our minds from prior actions. So just the repeated hearing creates a certain response in our mind that gets stored, and that becomes a part of the background activity of our mind, and at various points may be expressed in various ways. For instance, a child belonging to a family, the members of which are frequently quarreling with each other, also becomes quarrelsome by nature. Certain religious sects make common people firmly believe that certain actions are sinful and certain others are virtuous. So these are belief systems that are promoted. It can get very complex because how do you figure out what makes sense and what doesn't? And when are you just being programmed in some way by the environment in which you're in? Sometimes instinct, and this, Bob is using the term instinct in this reference, and I use the friendly version of referring to Anandamurti in terms of Baba. Instinct is as a mental habit or mental pattern, is imposed on human beings, on human minds, as something which must be followed, which must be obeyed. Under such circumstances, you see that imposed item and the mind flows, the mind moves, developing its instinct. But coming to that particular mental structure, it cannot come outside the imposed idea. What happens? The mind cannot move forward. The mind will have to move within the periphery of the imposed idea. That imposed idea is called dogma or bhava jadata. So when repeated, or it might not even be repeated so much as coming from certain authorities, or certain cultural groups from many different directions. There are ways in which our minds are constantly being influenced. For that matter, just all the advertising we're bombarded with. We're constantly being told how to think. This is a serious problem. And meditation is obviously going to be influenced by these various things. You are moving forward. You are developing your fraternity throughout the universe. But if a dogma says, a dogma based on a particular scripture or particular philosophy says, you know, you are a blessed being and they are slaves. They are there to be ruled by you. They are to be governed by you. This idea checks the progress. It's a dogma. Now your progress in the realm of spirituality, in the phase of development, is choked there. So it becomes a very complex question is, when is something a dogma and when is strong advice wise to follow? How do you know? It is a dogma. When a dogma comes, you should first apply your common sense. Does it make sense to you? If common sense fails to give you a satisfactory reply, apply your logic. Think it through, analyze it. If logic fails to give you a satisfactory reply, apply your sense of humanity and get the reply and do accordingly. You are not to be guided by any dogma. What is your sense of humanity? What does that mean? And I think probably more currently, Anandamurti would say your sense of neo-humanism, extending it beyond humanity to all existence within our planet, at least in terms of our immediate influences, but your sense of the welfare of all people. Your sense of the welfare of all beings, of all created objects within our world. So we're going to take this a step further now in thinking, well, spirituality has to do with a kind of expansion of mind that is unlimited, to unlimitedness. And this gets into issues of consciousness and unlimited consciousness. There are various representations, if you would, of the term God. And in the orientation of Ananda Marga, there's a concept of Brahma, which is a combination of consciousness, Paramarpusha, and a creative force or Prakriti. This concept of Brahma, if someone asks how the concept of Brahma can be conveyed, my reply will be that Brahma can be communicated about as well as a deaf person and a dumb person, meaning someone who cannot speak, can communicate with each other. Thus, the spiritual world is beyond the scope of verbal externalization. So this sense of universal consciousness is beyond our individual minds and beyond any ability to really be able to describe it in any meaningful way, as much as people attempt that. So we've got a pretty big dilemma here then. And often one will hear that the point of a spiritual meditation is to, for ego transcendence, or going beyond our little I, our limited ego, and somehow merging our mind in this infinite consciousness, taking our limited consciousness, moving it into an infinite consciousness. But if there's no way to talk about that, how do we know what we're doing? So I would like, in this next section, for people to think about their connection with a universal consciousness. And if we can have some more comments in the chats about how do you think about your connection with the universal consciousness? What are your ways of thinking, conceiving of that, even though this will certainly be incomplete, we have to start somewhere. So please try, if you can, to express something of that in the chat. So Dada is saying unconditional love, the companion who is always with me. Let's see, very lengthy one. From Satya, let's see.
That was
Millions and
about the
billions.
cults before this question came.
Okay. That was an earlier comment.
Yes.
Yeah, there certainly are such. Yeah, there in Africa, there have been such horrible things that have happened with cults, well, also elsewhere. Oh my goodness, I'm
With
trying to
dogma.
remember. Yeah,
Sorry, with dogma, yeah.
yeah, but there's also been, kidnappings of children for various purposes. Certainly, and that's happened in Africa. But starving children, and various Western cults. There are lots of strange, terrible things. So, Chitra, my connection with the universal consciousness starts with a feeling that from my heart, that cannot be expressed in words. Ah, yes. There are certain feelings that are major. Brother Shiva, I think of Shiva Baba all the time these days. Throughout the day, I think my connection with cosmic consciousness is greater than ever because I need it more than ever. There is no way I would be surviving all the stuff I'm going through without it. There is some kind of a resource that this framework provides that is very hard to put into words, but has very deep personal meaning often to people. We need to go with the mind to a place beyond the mind. Ah, this is Amitabha, very interesting paradox. How the mind can lead to its abandonment or its transcendence, I guess is a better way to think of it. A profound desire, need, joy to relate to huge mystery, which is my life in this universe, in Omega. Oops. Come on.
David Key wrote, I feel it in my heart intuitively.
Okay. Yeah, there's one
Guru
from
Bhakti, we need
Satya.
a
Anyone who has ever loved, I'm having trouble. This gets in them. Loved anyone will vigorously eschew bigotry. Many bigots are married, yet not in love. Ah, so there's something about love. There's something very important in this nature of love. And Shakti Devi, has that gotten translated?
Yes, for me, it is not easy to think of the Supreme Consciousness. Rather, I think of Baba.
Ah, very
Wait,
interesting
that's
point.
Shiva. Yes, and that's Shakti Deva. I'm sorry, Shiva's translating Shakti Deva's comment.
Ah, okay. Yeah, sometimes having a vehicle through which to touch that infinite, to actually have your mind absorbed in that infinite consciousness is actually it's a very exceptional state, and to be able to share that is the special value of a spiritual master or a guru. So that I think is quite meaningful.
Shiva Priya says it's like any other love affair, but with no end.
That's an interesting framework. Yes. Yeah, it's quite an affair. Um,
Guru Charan says the way to think about universal consciousness is to see everything we come in contact with as an expression of universal consciousness through our mantra.
Elements of the practices are tools. Yes, very much so.
Catherine says the birds, nature, and awesome natural wonders bring me into awareness in precious moments throughout the day.
That's a very important framework, is how to see this infinite consciousness being expressed throughout everything. And we'll be having some words concerning that in particular shortly. How are we doing? Are there more here? Or?
That's everything.
Okay, I think that's a wonderful set of comments. So let me just eliminate this. The real essence of Dharma, Dharma meaning the spiritual orientation uh, of an individual or of a human being, is its inner import is hidden in one's existential I feeling. The highest goal of Dharma is spiritual progress. The terminating point of excellence is Paramatma, or the universal soul, you might say, or the supreme cognition, that supreme mental being. Where is the abode of this Paramatma? Its abode is the human mind. Ultimately, it's within your own individual mind. It is not somebody else. It's yours. Now, here we're using the pronoun he, but technically this is just an arbitrary choice, because obviously when you're dealing with something universal, there's no gender there. This is beyond gender. But conceptually, for various reasons, this was a way of referring that has evolved. And so depending on your particular orientation, and I'm very sensitive to how this affects certain sisters, I could just as easily say she instead of he, but since I'm quoting, I will stick with the way it was written. He, capitalized, meaning that that universal entity is the subtlest entity. Therefore, he can be realized only through feeling, by no other means. You know, there were references in the comments about feeling. It's that feeling that is essential to bring one in some kind of touch, if you would. Forgive me for the physical analogy. Each and every entity in physical world, psychic world, and in the world of Dharma is a metamorphosed form of that supreme consciousness. And when everything is a metamorphosed form of the supreme entity, then one is to feel that everything of this universe is spiritual. Nothing is physical or psychic. Everything there is a dance of the cosmic cognition. Now, ideas like this fly in the face of materialist science. This is something that would immediately be dismissed by probably well over 90%, 99% of all scientists. But interestingly, I just want to reassure you that there is a small growing movement within the scientific community that are calling themselves post-materialist scientists. And one of the principles of these post-materialists is that consciousness is primary. Consciousness is the origin of everything. And there are people actually writing about in various serious analytic ways, attempting to demonstrate this through various kinds of scientific logic as well as experiments, and looking at unusual phenomena that science ignores or dismisses. But when you look closer, really, you have to postulate something such as a universal consciousness. And even physicists are picking this up and linking it with some of the more advanced quantum mechanics theories and seeing ways in which this might actually be. So we're living in a materialist age, but if in reality we're starting from some universal consciousness that maybe was expressed in some manner through what is called the Big Bang in terms of the start of the universe, as material began to crystallize. This metamorphosis, this change of form, is a very important thing to realize when you look at everything around you, that still active within it may be elements of that original supreme or universal consciousness within everything. Critical idea. So when you love the Paramapuruša, the universal consciousness, with all your propensities, your psychic urges, good and bad, then that flow of your mind is devotion. Devotion is a form of love for that infinite entity. By dint of one's devotion, one can attain the supreme stance. The supreme stance, one gets the Paramapuruša. Well, what does Anandamurti mean when he says gets? One's mind becomes merged with that universal consciousness. That is what the point of spiritual meditation is about. So you should remember, your life should start from the point of devotion, culminate in the point of devotion. Devotion is the order. Devotion is the policy for each and every spiritual aspirant. and it is a principle for all intellectual and spiritual minded people. Does anybody have any kind of difficult feeling about the strength of that statement? Why should you accept that? How do you know that's not just some other piece of dogma? So we're going to go through another series of comments here, if you can, in terms of how people relate to this idea of devotion. And we're going to, so various issues here. Why is devotion so necessary? What if I don't feel it? But I might like my meditation, but what if I don't feel devotion? Can devotion become dogmatic? Ouch. Few comments, please. So here's a long one. Let's see. I don't know whether this is a translation of something somebody else has written or, oh wait, there's maybe one higher. Dada, you had a comment. These are moving faster. Let's see. Yeah. Dada says, devotion, repeating my mantra all the time, hearing and reading devotional stories about devotion enriches my life. Then continued. Did I miss something?
Now, Shiva's comment is the answer to the question too.
Yeah, okay. So this is long. But I think it looks, at least the little I've seen so far, it's interesting. Yes, this one is the hardest for me. I'm extremely skeptical and spent a good part of my life as an atheist or agnostic. Also, I was abused by religious people at different points in my life, and my own beliefs and sense of values has frequently been at odds with religious people. So I then can have a very negative gut reaction to certain words, one of which is devotion. Some others are surrender, grace, God, sin, morality. I'm trying hard to reframe these terms in ways that reflects their true meaning and not muddied up in all the negative dogmatic ideas that I grew up associating with these words. In other words, I'm trying to create new mental models about them. I also think I identify as being rebellious and not following rules. Oh boy, troublesome person, but maybe the best kind of person to have. So there's a part of me that doesn't want to be devotional because it seems akin to being brainwashed or not thinking critically. Although I know the two are not synonymous, but some devotees seem that way. Point well taken. Let's see where to go.
Continues below. I don't understand how some people believe in things unquestionably, because that has rarely been my experience. I do think I'm actually extremely devotional and have been since childhood, but not towards a person or man-made organization, but to the highest pure cosmic consciousness.
What a story. very, very interesting. Very penetrating intellect, I think.
Radha in Puerto Rico writes, Namaskar, most certainly devotion is very easily become dogmatic. If I'm told I should be, then I will do and say. Chitra in Vietnam writes, devotion is necessary because it helps you to move firmly to your goal. If you don't feel it, you will be stuck by obstacles. Devotion cannot become dogmatic because you act according to your conscience and not to what you are told. Devaki writes, devotion for me involves singing kirtan and bhajans. When I don't feel devotional, I sing and it opens my heart, which helps me to experience love. Satya writes, subtleties may morph into dogma due to excessive objectification or pretentious deceits through opportunistic ostentation. Wow.
That's a great one. Yeah, any vehicles or individuals that are representing something else are going to have a difficult time eliminating their own self-interest. And so how one separates out self-interest of the person conveying the message to the inner truth of the message is certainly a knotty problem. Knotty. A few more here, and then I think we'll need to go on.
Yep. Shakti Deva writes, devotion is acquired through the advanced form of our sadhana. Ishtadeva, devotion can only be judged dogmatic if evaluated by others. But this is not correct because devotion is exclusively an inward movement.
Very interesting, yes.
Shiva Priya, if we are devoted to a God that is not in all creatures and nature and in yourself, that feeling will not expand your perceptions, it will limit you and separate you from everything else. It will alienate you.
Yeah, feelings again, the earlier comment about feelings, the personal feelings, and this about how if you're not connected with that feeling, it can lead to a sense of alienation from the world around. You know, those are very important.
Shiva Priya, if we're no, wait, we do. Amitabha, it is hard to feel devotion for an impersonal entity. The Guru makes things easy.
The Guru makes things easy, but there's also tremendous vulnerability, as I think we've been seeing. And certainly, as you can hear by the stories and that's why people are afraid, because there are some who have these elevated mental strengths who have exploited and taken advantage. So it's a very complex issue.
Catherine writes, South Africa is sadly glamored by a dogmatic devotion that replaces critical thought. All groups believe they are deeply devoted, and yet to a God that justifies division, poverty, lack, and abuse.
That's a very major point, is what is this group doing? Is it putting itself above others, or is it being inclusive and attempting to serve the whole of reality, all elements of society with equal care and love? And certainly even within Ananda Marga, I mean, I think as people have been implying, we're not immune to it. This is a human issue. Are there just a couple more that are here at this point, and then we need to move on?
Right. Aradon in Puerto Rico writes, surrender for me has been the route to acquire devotion, surrender due to external pressures. She feels forced to surrender, I believe. Satya writes, an organismic approach about universe and intimacy with it is remedial to many of these concerns. That's everything.
Yes, I think how we relate to the world around us is deeply influential on the nature of our mind. But let's see what Anandamurti has to say about this. You love your small I very much, and unknowingly you love that Paramatma, that supreme soul, more than you do yourself. Clear? You have nourished an unknown love for Paramatman and a known love for the small eyes. That love for Paramatman is unknown, at least certainly for the majority of people. That love for that universal entity is just not something that is known. Each and every created being has knowingly or unknowingly adored him, accepted him as the only object of ideation. Somebody ideates on him knowingly, somebody unknowingly, somebody positively, somebody negatively. But this universal consciousness is the supreme terminus, the supreme goal or endpoint of all the marches of the created beings. The unknowing adoration, what is meant by this? The more we ideate on, let's say, money and making as much money as we can, going back to what this universe, how this universal consciousness is expressed, it is expressed through the entire universe. So if it happens to be that aspect of the universe of money that is the object of your ideation, then it's unknowingly ideating on the universal consciousness in the form of money. And ultimately, though, these are all distortions. These are all distortions of our minds as our minds are separated from this universal consciousness. Now, if this urge towards matter, this material longing, is properly directed, Your longing for money, your longing for name or fame may be converted into a longing for Paramapurusha, that universal consciousness, who is the goal of your life. The individual should feel a fraternal emotion for and attachment to the external world. Oh, wait a minute. What about this renunciate stuff? Aren't we supposed to go live in a cave or something and get away from all of this? Well, no. This sentimental contact with the external world is a must. We need to have close feelings about all of what we're interacting with. That's very powerful. And in some ways, that may be one step toward being immune to dogmas. Because if dogmas are in some way constricting, limiting, setting things apart, then clearly this emotion that is linking us to the entire external world is going to be in some way curtailed, limited. If someone is under the impression that I am doing sadhana for the sake of personal liberation, and I have nothing to do with the world, and thus denies his or her contact with external physicality, although the person's physical body is very much in this world, the person is cheating himself and indulging in selfishness. There's a flaw in the thinking, if you would. Service to humanity with a view to serve Paramapurusha, and with the same attachment which one feels towards oneself and Paramapurusha, is an essential prerequisite for sadhana. This will, sadhana meaning meditation, or the effortful process that is meditation. This will establish the equilibrium and parallelism of the individual rhythms with the rhythms of the external physicalities. This will bring about balance of the internal drive to be part of that infinite consciousness and maintaining a strong personal connection with the whole world around us. If you direct your sentimental entity, your feeling, toward its, here Baba's using the neutral term, the neuter term, neither masculine nor feminine. It's all arbitrary. In terms, I could go into an explanation, but I don't think that's critical here. There is a subtle reason why, but that's not critical. Toward its great sentiment, then your emotion or thought, being on the higher plane, loses its pettiness. Your existence is then hardly distinguishable from it, from that supreme consciousness. All the urges and longings, those vrittis that we mentioned, should be gathered together and directed toward the supreme. If this is done, indomitable psychic energy, meaning undefeatable, An invincible spiritual energy will grow from within. All of these urges, this is an indirect way of referring to devotion, that the entire mental flow is being directed toward that supreme entity. So, getting back to the issue of dogma, when a dogma comes to you, you should first apply your common sense. Because many times dogmas, whether they're coming from elsewhere or from even people that you may have respect for and good feelings about, but if it rings wrong, if it doesn't make sense to you, listen to your common sense. If common sense fails to give you a satisfactory reply, you're still unsure, but you're feeling something's not right, apply your logic. Think it through, analyze it. If logic fails to give you a satisfactory reply, meaning you're still unsure, apply your sense of humanity. Apply your sense of how this affects everyone around you, how it affects the whole world around you, and get the reply and do accordingly.
Sorry,
You
Dada.
are not to be guided by any dogma. It should be an exclamation point. Just a couple more here. I don't know how our time is doing. Oh, we still have time. When your mind will develop the knowledge that Paramatma is watching us all the time, you will be in Dhruva Smriti. Now, this is an interesting term, Dhruva Smriti. It means constant remembering. That Paramatma, that this infinite consciousness, it's turning around the focus, because a lot of times we're thinking that we are feeling devotion toward this, whether it's this spiritual master, or whether it's toward the supreme abstract entity, which being abstract is harder to relate to, certainly. But if it's toward, then that supreme entity, that infinite frame of mind, or a frame of consciousness, is the object, is what we're focusing on. But how can you take within your own mind as an object something that is so big? So there's a logical problem there. Flipping it around, if you really realize that this universal consciousness has you always in its mind, that's what Dhruva Smriti is about. Now, the term Smriti is actually a very fascinating one, because it's come out in some of these various analyses of this sanitized or secularized meditation research, particularly in the mindfulness work, where it's gotten very popular in academic circles because it can seem free of all spirituality. Well, if you actually look back in the early Buddhist literature, mindfulness is the word representing mindfulness in Sanskrit. I forget what the Pali word was, but is smriti, is remembering. So mindfulness is really has its origin in this concept of remembering. And I'm not sure all of the elements of remembering that the Buddhist orientation has, but it's a very interesting thing to think that the popularity of mindfulness is actually linked to this concept. And I would be surprised if there wasn't implicit in that this dhruva element or constant remembering. Here, psychospiritual knowledge will be converted into spiritual knowledge. At this stage, object, subject, and objectivization will merge into one. Objectivization meaning the form in which our mind is able to perceive the external world. It's a representation of the external world within our subjective experience. But merging all three into one takes us beyond that limited ego state. Okay, I think that's where I am at this point. Yes. So that's a very important idea to end with. And I think we may have another 12 minutes or something like that. I don't know if there are questions or further comments that people would like to share. But I would be quite interested to hear any thoughts that people have or any questions that people have. Dada, maybe you can go through these. Let's see.
I'm unmuted. That would be helpful.
Yeah, if people want, oh,
Satya says the cells in one's body do these things naturally, and are expectant of such in self-repair and optimized physical health. We are in an era of humanity where a carcinomically dominated society is, through mild and more forceful efforts, reclaiming its natural stasis germane to our species and planet at large. David
I
Key
don't know
asks,
if
I'm curious
I don't,
about some of the research pertaining to microvita.
sure. I don't know if we really need to go through, could people just express things verbally? I mean, that's another
Ishtadeva
possibility. Or
has,
have it translated if they want to talk in a different language, then have it translated.
yeah, Ishtadeva, you want to speak? Your hand is up.
Yes, Dadaji. Namaskar. Thank you so much. Baba has given so many definitions of devotion. Sometimes he says devotion is service. selfless service. Sometimes he says devotion is addition towards the Lord. Sometimes he says again, devotion is love personified, etc., etc., etc. So, but there is something really interesting, and that maybe all of us should try and see. Baba, there's one little text of Baba, which Baba entitled as Your Personal God. Your Personal God. In this little text, Baba says, no person, no human being can understand that impersonal entity. None of us can understand that impersonal entity except there is a personified entity which guides us towards that impersonal entity. So that text is really interesting. Your personal God. I don't remember in which book, but we can try and search. And so devotion is something, it's not outwards, it's inwards. I remember there's a very interesting story of a dada who was singing Prabhat Sangeet. Okay, Baba was there, he was singing Prabhat Sangeet, and all the other acharyas, dadas, and didis who were there were so happy. They were just full in bliss. And Baba stopped and said, kick this dada out of my house. This is not an orchestra. Why? Because Dada was thinking that he is a very good singer. He's singing and he's making people fall into samadhi. So immediately as we remove that thought from that is that inwards movement of the devotion, immediately as we transfer it somewhere else than to that supreme consciousness, it is a mistake. So
Okay.
Very interesting story.
it's
I
something
like that a lot.
extremely
Ishtadeva, you're talking too fast. I think we
oh,
should
sorry,
let
Dada.
Raghavir
Okay.
for the translators.
Sorry, sorry,
Raghavir,
sorry,
why
sorry.
don't you respond?
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay,
Okay,
okay.
I think
Thank
I'm done.
you.
Thank you.
That
Mhm.
that was a wonderful story, and I think your point is well taken, that devotion is described in many different ways by Baba, and uh, we need to listen to them all and make as much sense as we can of them all and apply them internally within our own minds. Yeah, I think that's true. And ultimately, when it's a really horrible thing when children get put through dogmas that are in some way constricting their minds because they don't know any better. They're relying on the adults to make sense of the world for them. But in some ways, all children are having imposed thoughts that they have to deal with. And part of what our adult lives are about is trying to sort through all of that. And particularly if we've adopted a spiritual approach, this is facilitating the unwrapping, the breaking down, the disintegration of all of those negative or at least detrimental forms of thinking. Any other comments? I think we're pretty close to our allotted time, Dada. I don't know if you have any parting words of well-being.
I think your class touched on very deep spiritual ideas that are helpful to everyone who is trying to meditate, who is trying to develop spiritually. I think we need to think about these things more and more.
And when we develop this kind of internal intensity, that's when, as one of the quotes said earlier, the intensity of our own capacity expands and has so much greater potential.
The Supreme Consciousness is all powerful. When you have devotion for that Supreme, you become more powerful to do the work of the Supreme.
To allow it to be expressed through you as fully as possible, and to be aware, not to do it blindly, but to feel the truth of that love that you are experiencing within yourself and that you're sharing with the world around you. Well, I think that's a sweet way to end. Namaskar,
Thank you very much
everyone.
for our interpreters who worked very, very hard. And thank you very much to everyone. Namaskar.
Namaskar.